we're really fortunate to have Dan Gotlieb here. Dan did his undergraduate at Yale. That's correct. Which is a school, I think, similar to Hampshire. You could be at Hampshire. We also take bribes from our water polo team. So. to get in, similar. And then he did his PhD at UPenn in psychology, so related to our department, some of our departments. And then was professor of psychology at SweetBriar and went through their whole chaos and resurgence. And I think during that process, he wrote a series of blog posts. So he wrote 4 blog posts where he went through and analyzed their financial data. And they created a very powerful narrative to understand what was going on there. And to, they ended up having a lot of legal battles, and I think that was influential in that as well. So he's going to tell us about his experience. And the reason I got contacted with him was because we had Lily Leonard last week, and we were, for the re-envisioning, trying to figure out how to make sense of our financials. And so I was like, who can I talk to at SweetBriar? And Dan was incredibly generous with his time. We just talked for about an hour, and hopefully he'll be able to give us some insight here about what their experience was like, and maybe even some insight to Hampshire's financials. That's right. So, so great. So without further ado, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks. So actually, I'm going to be talking a lot more about your financials than I am about SweetBriar. I think that's probably what you care most about at this point. And so just briefly, let me tell you why I'm talking to you right now as opposed to someone else. When SweetBriar, when they announced SweetBriar's closure, I took on the task of, in a sense, fact-checking or putting into context all the different numbers that the administration and board were throwing at us. It turns out it's non-trivial to figure out what's going on with the finances of a college, and if they want to make it look a certain way, it's not too hard to do that. We got lucky. Our administration board made a lot of mistakes in how they did things, and we were able to catch them on those mistakes. It took an enormous amount of time and effort. I didn't sleep for long periods of time, but in the process, I learned an enormous amount about the financials of an institution. I talked to forensic accountants and lawyers and former presidents and admissions directors, and I poured over all the data I could. And so I feel like I actually was able to figure out a bit about what's going on. And what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to go through, at least first, your the presentation that you were given by the president, I believe, or some of it. And I'm going to try to put some of their numbers and statements in context for you. One of the most important things for us, I think, early on in helping us to have a movement to help save the college was having a counter narrative to their narrative. And my understanding is that your administration and board has done a much better job controlling the narrative than ours did. We did get lucky with some of the people involved with that. So I hope that's okay. If I'm boring you at any point, stop me, ask me questions. But that's really sort of what I wanted to do. And then to talk with you what it really means that you're not having a fall 2019 class. Because I think for those of you who still have hope that things can be as they are, that was their way of breaking up with you. That's an enormous blow financially to the college, no matter what at this point. And it's not the end of anything, of course. Nothing really is. But it's going to be challenging. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to be putting up slides for you and run lots of graphs. I hope they'll be readable and understandable. You probably won't be seeing me again for a while. I will be able to still see you in the corner, though. And again, scream out any questions. I haven't actually been in academia now for many months at this point. I haven't given a talk or really spoken to people in quite a while. So this is going to be interesting. All right, so I've done a lot of work on this, but it's been a crash course. I just learned from Ethan very recently about what's happening. I've sort of been avoiding everything related to higher ed for a while. And so this is, please forgive me if the graphs aren't as pretty as you would like. They're not as pretty as I would like, but let's get started. So I'm going to share my screen and put up the slides and see if this works. All right, so does this seem to work?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Let me see if I can remember from the slide. There we go. Okay, so let's get started. I want to start again with with this presentation that you were given, and this is a common theme for anyone who's going to close a college, even if they're not shady, of course, is going to want to make it look like it's justified as much as possible. And they're going to want to blame others as much as possible. And
Can you hear us? Lily Leonard just texted me and asked if this is live stream. So I just want to find out if it is.
So I didn't know how to do that, so unfortunately it's not, but I'm recording on Skype, so we should have it afterwards.
Thank you. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, so I want to go through some of these claims about it. The blaming of external forces is a very common thing, and I can't tell you what your narrative should be. I mean, you have to figure that out yourself, but I can sort of try to set the context for you to do that. They're going to try to argue for external forces, and I'm going to try to give you the ammunition to basically say, no, this was not something that was out of our control. This was poor management in one way or another. So let's start with the claim about demographic trends, fewer high school graduates in the Northeast. Let me show you where these data come from. This is sort of the federal database of stuff. So this is their official projections, fairly recent, about enrollment, or at least high school graduation in millions, going through 2026, 27. And I hope what you can generally see is it's a little bumpy, but it's going slowly a little bit up. But there is an issue with the Northeast. It's true. If you look at these numbers, if you look at the 3 bars to the left that say Northeast, you can see that the 2012-13 actual number in thousands there at something like 555,000, and they're projecting it to go down about 6% by 2026-27. If you get more detailed, you can look at where their estimates by state. You can see Massachusetts there is in the less than 5% drop right there. Now, I don't want to say that that's a meaningless drop by any means, but 5% over the course of 15 years is highly absorbable. It's the kind of small scale trend that's going to get lost among all the noise in your data. So this kind of argument really doesn't make all that much sense when you're looking at what had happened here, which is a very rapid decline, at least that's what they're arguing, in a period of time that has nothing to do with these changing demographics. And also I'll add that even if you do have a 5% drop in your base, and your potentials, that is the equivalent over this period of time of probably about $1.5 million a year that you would have to make up somehow if you lost that based on this. And that's a conservative estimate. So that's manageable over 15 years to figure out. But it's not a lie what they're saying with that, which is cool. Your board administration didn't outright lie as much as ours so far. It looks. So there's that. Now the needing more financial need, I don't really know how we're gonna quantify that, and I don't want to get into that. Same with the next one, competition increasing, 65% of private colleges miss their enrollment goals. Frankly, I'm surprised it's not higher. I mean, you set your own goals. They're arbitrary, and most of the time, I think you set aspirational goals. That's the case of a statement that's meaningless. But one that gets a lot of play is the next one. You've probably heard about discounting, and they've mentioned that as a serious issue. Is this right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's mind-numbing to me that this is still an issue. Discounting is rampant, and I want to show you what's happening with that. So what I'm going to show you now, this is the slide that was shown to you and to the board, I believe, based on the tuition discounting rates over fiscal year 2012 to 2018. I personally don't think that it's a particularly meaningful measure after the first year. I think looking at the first year class is really where you're understanding what's happening, because that tends to follow a class throughout what their discount rate is. That's the green here. I recreated these numbers. I'm pretty darn confident I know how to do this at this point. And I can tell you that they're a little bit off. But here they are, and you're going to see this kind of graph over and over. So let me just stop here and talk. There's usually going to be 3 lines on it. What I've plotted here is Hampshire College, as well as the mean and the median separately for the Annapolis group of colleges. Are you familiar with the Annapolis group?
No.
Okay, the Annapolis group is a group of approximately 130 liberal arts colleges, quality liberal arts colleges. You are one of the members of them. It is what I consider your best peer group to consider. These are high quality liberal arts institutions, and this is what gives you a sense of what's happening outside of Hampshire, because there's a lot of trends that are normal, and there's stuff happening that's not with you. So when you look at your discount rate, you can see that indeed it's rising across the board. And at Hampshire, you can see that it might even be steeper. You start out pretty low. It does never hit, at least as of 2016-17, above 55%. I don't know where those numbers of above 60 are, but in reality, it doesn't matter. Discount rate is the most misunderstood and misused metric of them all. If you want to lower your discount rate, all you have to do is lower your sticker price. Since nobody pays the sticker price and it's all just a game, if you lower your sticker price, automatically your discount rate will go down. It's a game that these colleges are playing to put a high sticker price and then give big discounts. That's probably not a great idea, but that's what they're doing. So let's look at better metrics then that are based on this sort of. For example, do you guys know about the net price? This is a very common metric that's used. This is simply the amount of money an average student gives to the college per year. Now, what you can see is that among Annapolis Group colleges, it's at about 25,000, and it's been flat. Oh, and let me add, all of my figures are inflation adjusted. So if they look different from others you've seen, that might be why. But you can see that your net price is high. Your students pay more than schools of this type in general, but it doesn't really look like there's much of a long-term trend down, except that there does seem to be a peak that you guys hit in 2012-13. It doesn't look to me like you're going down, it's more regressing to the mean, but hard to tell. But net price has a problem too, in that the net price is includes the room and board, but it is problematic in that it is only for those students receiving financial aid of some form. And so it excludes, in a sense, all the full pays. What you really want to know is a little bit different. What you really want to know is how much is your average student giving you per year? It's a hard number to sort of get right away, but here it is. I'm sorry, this is the percent of students receiving your institutional aid. And you can see with Hampshire, it starts out really low, but by 2016-17 at least, it's almost it's above 90% at that point, and that's the norm as well. This is what schools are doing. So here is probably your best estimate of what's going on with your sort of tuition revenue. This is your actual tuition revenue per average incoming student, okay, that you're getting. You can see the Annapolis group there might be a tiny bit of a decrease, especially since a peak in 2008-9, but it's pretty darn flat. All this talk of having to discount more and more, well, maybe you're discounting more and more, but students are paying about the same amount on average. What you're seeing at your own school is interesting, and it does seem to be that you have a drop over the last couple of years to what is closer to the average. But again, if you're looking at this more long-term, you certainly don't see anything that shows there's an enormous crisis at this point, but you do see some worry signs. Are there questions on this?
No, keep going.
Okay, so that's going to be the first sort of thing talking about some of that. Here's the next slide that we have, the new fiscal reality, where they're claiming declining enrollment, suppressed revenue, and low retention. Let's start with enrollment and retention and move to revenue. This is one of the slides they showed you. It looks pretty drastic. Here's another one. Oh, it looks terrifying, right? Of course, because they do things like manipulate axes and show you things nastily, but that's normal too. Let me put it in a little bit of context here. There's a lot of different ways to measure enrollment. I'm going to give you what I think are some good ones here. This is the full-time, first-time degree seeking. In other words, this is basically your incoming class of full-time degree-seeking students, which for a college like Hampshire is most of you, your students fit that bill. You can look at the Annapolis group. You can see since 1980, what is clearly a slow but gradual trend upward. So all the people saying there's enrollment dips, it's not really showing across the industry because everyone's talking about it. And even your own numbers, yeah, since a peak, you're coming down a bit. But if you're looking longer term, what you see is a gradually increasing trend upward that looks to mirror pretty much the rest of the schools. Again, yeah, a little bit of a drop lately, but this is the normal noise of a school, of a healthy school. This is how it works. You have lean times, you have strong times. If every school gave up when yours did, we would have no colleges left. So when we moved out of this, we can look at, this is full-time degree seeking. This is sort of all of your students, basically. And you can see once again from 1980 that among the Annapolis colleges, you see no sign that there are less and less people wanting to go to these kinds of schools. Maybe it flattens out, but it certainly doesn't seem to be dropping. You do see that you have some ups and downs, and it looks like you're in a down phase after a very prolonged up phase. But it certainly doesn't look like the long-term trend is disastrous. Of course, a best fitting line would look pretty good on this if I put it on. So that's some of your enrollment. This is an FTE equivalent fall enrollment. You'll hear that metric a lot. That's where they turn your part-time students into full-time students by basically taking 2.5 of them for every one full-time. That's really what they do. You can see by this metric, again, you have a small drop recently, but there is not something in the greater context of liberal arts schools that's really problematic. And anyone who's telling you otherwise is lying. I can't find drops in enrollment no matter how I look. They're just not there. Okay, so it does not look like fewer and fewer people want to go to schools of this type, but there is a little bit of a problem in Hampshire, certainly. Probably internal factors, and you probably know better what's going on with that. Here's your first year retention rate, fall to fall. This is the most typical one. I hope what you can see is that you're mirroring the rest of what's happening in a slow and gradual decrease, but there is certainly nothing as of 2017-18 that looks drastic. Why is yours so low? I don't know. Different schools have different kinds. You are a unique school. You have a very interesting program and you do things differently. SweetBriar also have low retention. We're a women's college, which, the more different you are, it's probably likely the more you're going to get that. But I guess the point is that you're not seeing any great difference in what's happening in the last 15 years here. Things just haven't been changing much. This is something that's been striking to me in looking at your numbers. Okay, so in terms of enrollment, you have some very recent declining enrollment, but both the overall trends for you and for your peer groups are not going in the wrong direction. And your retention is about what you should expect for who you are, honestly. Now, what about the revenue? Now, here we're getting somewhere. What's happening? This is the slide. Oh, let me stop. Are there questions on this so far?
No, good.
Okay. Here's your change in operating revenue. This is the slide that they gave you to scare you in your talk, and it looks pretty scary. As you know, they're, of course, messing with the scales and to show you the most drastic drop from a peak, of course. Let me put this in context a little bit. Here are your total operating revenues as reported in your audited financials. So these are reported by yourselves in your official documents for that. Inflation adjusted, of course. And yeah, you can see that you are seeing a decrease in the last couple of years. I put in the 2018-19 point that was given by your president. That's not in any of the official numbers yet. It's too new. But you can see that that there is a decrease. You can also see that it's a very recent one. In fact, you wouldn't really think much is happening except in the last couple of years. You could see that the drop in the last couple of years is pretty drastic compared to what has happened. And it's unique to your school as well. It's the sign of something really wrong going on somewhere else. And at SweetBriar, we had something similar when we lost an admissions director and did not hire anyone for a couple of years. We did not have a professional working our admissions for the last couple of years. That's a good way to see something like this. If you have something similar, it's a good way to see something like this. Oh, I replotted it by messing with the scale to make it look more drastic, right? That's what they do. I can do the same thing. They do that. But this is really what it more looks like. And if we put it in better context, right, we can break down your different forms of revenue a bit to see what's really happening. The top one is your tuition and fees. If you are a tuition-driven school, you can see over the very long term, it does not look terrible in terms of your trends, except there are a couple lean years coming up. You can see that your other main source of revenue is gifts, alumni giving generally, and you can see, not atypical, a decrease there too. That decrease, which is the gray with the squares, I'm going to put out on a separate one so you can see. Oops. I guess I didn't. I thought I had that on set. But let me just say that it's a significant drop of a few million a year over that time. You're not short by very much. So that few million is something that, is an issue. Again, I see nothing here that's unsolvable, but it's an issue. This is their slide of your net total room and board revenue change by percentage to scare you. It's a weird way to present those data, to say the least. Let me show you basically the same data, but presented in a way that makes sense, at least to me. Hampshire here, the triangle, you can notice that something weird is happening. First of all, look at the Annapolis group, mean and medians. You get a rise until about 2008-9, and then it's been flat. Again, this is inflation adjusted, and you still do not see any sign that students are paying less and less to go to the schools. It's just a lie. There's no evidence. But you have some issues there. I don't know what you were doing prior to 2008-9, but it was pretty spectacular in terms of how much money you were getting from tuition. And you have two big drops. Looks like there was one around the time of the big economic crash. Notice it used a lot more than average. It's not that all schools fundamentally faltered then. SweetBriar did as well. And then you have another drop there at the end. Both of those are drastic and pretty quick and are not the signs of anything having to do with external forces. That's an internal problematic thing. Someone messed up somewhere along the way. Probably more than one person. And at the end, quite honestly, you're probably guessing this too. They're probably tanking at the very end too. They wanted the numbers to look as bad as possible. That's normal. So the very last numbers are hard to know what to make of. But anyway, that's the numbers for that. Oh yes, here it is. This is your contributions, gifts, grants. This is basically your alumni giving. And you can see that, not surprisingly, 2017-18 was a particularly low year. It's one that they, of course, were using to show just how bad the situation was. If you had had another 2 million, it wouldn't have looked nearly as bad for you, which was what it was previously. But there you are. Okay, expenses. Briefly, I don't want to go into too much here, just to show you that your expenses broken down by category have been pretty darn fixed since at least 2004-05. It's kind of spectacular. Very recently, you've dropped a little bit. But what I want to focus more on is not specifically your expenses here, but just to show you, this is your expenses and this is your revenue here. And what I hope you can see is that there's just nothing here that shows the kind of problem that necessitates a big change. Yes, 2016, 17, 17, 18, you have a little bit of a deficit. Most of the time, you didn't have one before that. Yes, I know you sometimes have to get people to specially donate, but that's what alumni giving is. It's those donations. Yes, I know you had a dividend from your endowment that you one-time kind of thing. This kind of thing happens though. But in general, you've been balancing your budget, and there's really nothing striking about things looking bad here. They look shockingly good, actually. And just to go back to, revenue. I wish I would have plotted this differently, but when you look at investment income for operations, you can't see it. That's basically your endowment money. And when I looked at it, what I was shocked by was until 2017-18 at least, you weren't taking out more than your 4.5%. You were being incredibly responsible stewards. SweetBriar, in the 20 years before they closed, never took out that little. We were in such worse financial shape when they announced the closure than you guys were. It's sort of shocking to see. Okay. Are there questions at this point? Are we good still? Questions?
Doing good.
Okay. All right. So I want to point out too that, okay, so maybe the expenses and revenue, they kind of map out. Maybe it's because you're blowing through your assets and somehow that's getting pushed into expenses revenue side. Well, here are your assets for Hampshire. In the black one at the top are your net assets at the end of the fiscal year. And at the gray at the bottom are the unrestricted net assets. That's very important, of course, because that's basically the assets you can use. These are net assets too, which means this factors out your debt. It's about $30 billion and mostly bond debt. So your actual gross assets are about 30 million higher. But what you can see is that you've been doing remarkably well in recent times. Your assets have been growing, your investments have been doing quite well, and your unrestricted funds are doing well too. You have $30 million in unrestricted assets that at your disposals of 2017-18. It's really a remarkable number right there. No sign of a real problem here. In fact, when you look at this, you see a sort of remarkable strength right now. Okay, I'm putting it all on one graph just because in my mind, this was the graph that really told me what a disaster your management and your board was. This is simply the expenses, the revenues, the net assets, and unrestricted all on one graph. And what you see is that for at least 15 years, you see nothing that looks real problematic. Yeah, if you look at the last two, you'd say, what's going on? And you'd want to solve that problem. But there's nothing here that says, oh, it's time to give up, it's time to throw in the towel, unless you want to, which it's clear to me at least someone on the board wanted to. One person on a board can do a lot of damage. Two can do a heck of a lot of damage. Okay, there we go with that. Now, I want to focus on something else that's been really clear, is that they're scared to death of litigation. This, by the way, is your greatest leverage. If you can ever have put the fear of litigation into them, or the fear that they will be personally held responsible, they get very scared. And there's nothing else you can do will scare them. At least that's what it appeared with us. But there's a lot of talk in this about these colleges that closed and how they were going to get in trouble for being irresponsible. It's fascinating to me because I would question in some of their cases whether the actual closing was the irresponsible decision, not the letting in the fall classes. But here we have Mount Ida closes, oh no. Wheelock merged, Newberry closed, what a disaster, Green Mountain College closed. And I wanted to just put a little bit of that into perspective about these schools. And every year, a couple of schools close. It's unusual, and the number has not been increasing over the last number of decades, despite what people are saying. And the schools that close tend to be very small, often religious, and typically with very few resources. So I just want to show you what these schools look like compared to yours on some of these numbers. So this is just net assets here. And what you can see is Hampshire is in the medium gray squares, not the highest one, but the second one. At the top is Wheelock, who had lots of assets when they merged. And at the bottom are all the others, which you can basically see they're not in the same class. They didn't have much in terms of net assets, all the ones that closed.
Wow.
If you want to look at total unrestricted net assets, you see the same story. Wheelock was looking great. And I don't know why they merged. I mean, merging maybe it's for the best for them and maybe it's for the best. I have no idea, right? That's what you have to decide yourself. It's different than closing, of course. But you can look at the other schools and they had nothing. They had very few resources, no buffers. You can see what the problems were right there. And if you just look at endowment value, you get the same issue. You can see that you and Wheelock are doing pretty darn good with your endowment value. And you can see that Mount Ida wasn't, I guess, terrible, but it's still much lower. And the other two schools basically had nothing. So it's an apples and orange comparison. If you have assets and resources that could have buffered you for a number of years, there was no necessity to close. You could have managed for a while more, even if you would continue to fail as you had in some ways that look to me to be peculiar and based on some form of mismanagement or leadership failure. So they wanted to change. They wanted to go a different direction, and this was an excuse. And everyone has different motivations, of course. But that's at least what it looks like. Oh, I'm just throwing this out there. I don't know where else to put it. But they talk about that. I just wanted you to see what student-faculty ratio looks like, because I know they talk about how it's going in a terrible direction and whatnot. But it's been roughly flat for your Annapolis group of colleges since at least 2008-9. And you guys have basically settled down to about where all those other colleges are. So you're about where your peer groups are at this point. You don't look worse on almost any of the metrics than average. And I should say that none of these other schools is closing. No Annapolis group quality school has yet closed. You could be, as far as I know, if you did close or fundamentally lose your character, you would be the highest quality school to ever do that, basically. It's not something that happens commonly, and it's not something that's happening all over the place. Again, there's an internal stuff going on. I just want to keep emphasizing. Okay, so we're pretty much done with that, but I want to sort of briefly go to the end. Even if there wasn't a financial crisis before, isn't there one now? And here's the sad answer to that, and the answer to that is absolutely. When they announced that you would not be taking a fall 2019 class, they created a serious financial crisis. And let me just point that out. Let's say you lose a 300-person incoming class. Okay? I've already told you that each extra student gives you about $35,000 a year, but it's worse than that because they go for potentially 4 years. Yeah, you have retention issues, so that's not right. But on average, you can consider every student gained or lost to be worth over 4 years approximately $100,000. Okay? Now, what that means is that if you take 300 students away, that class, even if you could reverse everything, is going to cause you a 1-year revenue loss of about $10 million from where you would have been, and a 4-year revenue loss of in the order of greater than $30 million, right, that you would have had over that 4 years for that single class. And it's even worse than that, unfortunately, because recruiting is a multi-year endeavor. And by announcing it now, those people who are looking at going to school in a year or two, the juniors, the sophomores, are going to already cross you off their list. So you can expect to have smaller incoming classes for a couple of years after that. If somehow the decision were reversed and you were able to continue existing as you are now, you would probably have lost on the order of $50 million. And remember, you're closing over tiny deficits overall, right? You're closing over fractions of that amount. So they basically made sure to sabotage things, to make it almost impossible to continue by their announcement. And I think that I can't ever tell you what to think, but I remember at SweetBriar, there was all the different stages of grieving were seen in the different faculty members in different ways, including denial, including detaching, including anger and sadness and bawling and crying and bargaining and thinking maybe it won't be so bad. Maybe we can somehow, maybe it'll work out. This transition will be great, but maybe the merger will be good for something, but it's not going to be good for you. When they decided to do what they did, they broke up with them. And it's very unlikely that they're going to care much about you going forward. Even the ones that were friendly to you, I think it's unlikely that you can expect them to voluntarily give you anything. And this is something I learned through the SweetBriar thing as well, that if you want something from them or believe you deserve something, coming from a position of strength is much better than hoping that good behavior will get you something. They don't care about you. They give up on you. They basically, sounds to me like they decided that they're going to take their infrastructure and fill it with different people, which is one of the most insulting things that I can imagine. Totally unfair. It shows they have no idea what they're doing. And it also shows that they have no idea how to run a college financially either at this point. Again, if they give up when they did, every school did, all schools would be closed. You're not doing terrible, and you are not in a terrible place. So, if that all sounds pessimistic, yeah, you're in a tough situation right now, but you have options. And I think the first thing to do is take control of the narrative, because what they're doing is damaging not just you in Hampshire, but all of higher ed. The more that you can take back the narrative, the better position you'll be in, the better position higher ed will be in, and the better you'll feel about things, at least I think. And I will say also that 50 million is a lot of money, but if your alums care a lot, and if everyone's on board, anything can happen. Where there's a will, there's a way, and that's what I don't know about it. I don't know if there's a will. I don't know if enough of you care that much, if you really believe in yourself. SweetBriar closed. It was different than changing, right? Closing is a permanent thing. Maybe some of you think that changing is good overall, that what you were doing wasn't working. I just don't know. But what I was trying to do here was give you sort of the context to build the story that is your story and not what you've been sort of given by the appointed administration. Okay, that was a lot to digest. 12:38, timing's not bad. And I think I just want to stop there, and I'm happy to answer any sort of questions that you may have at this point.
One term I didn't hear you use was tuition dependency. And the figure apparently that was used in Hampshire's accreditation report was 87%. Does that make sense to you?
87%. Well, based on the numbers I was seeing there, that doesn't look like it's too far off. No, you had a tremendous amount of your revenue was coming from tuition and fees, yeah. But that's basically your model, though.
So that's not horrendous.
No,
Well,
why the 2019 decision is so detrimental.
Yeah.
Yeah, it what it means is that without an enormous influx of money, there's going to be a lot of people losing their jobs no matter what. And this is what happened at SweetBriar. Our incoming class for the year that they announced the closure was about 20 students. For about 3 years after the announcement of the closure, our numbers had been about half of what they were before. It's just it takes a tremendous amount to get back. And right now, I still think SweetBriar is going to survive. But it's very painful. It's a very difficult place to work. A lot of people have lost their jobs. Frankly, when it does succeed, it's going to be with very new people. It's going to almost all the people who were there during it are going to have moved on one way or another. So there's no good way out of what has happened at this point.
Thank you.
But just being tuition independent doesn't mean you'll fail. I mean, you were doing remarkably well with that for a while, and it doesn't look like there was any real reason why you couldn't continue. Sometimes people don't do good jobs. It looks like you had some of that, and it looks like they panicked, and to me, like someone there was not in your best interest.
Right.
Hello, hi, Kara. I'd be interested in you maybe pointing out for us wherever you can the narrative of mismanagement in the numbers that you pulled up. I mean, you mentioned it and sort of pointing us to it, but is there like any specific things that you could guess on?
Yeah.
Was the mismanagement, or are there particular numbers that we or graphs that we could focus on in terms of that narrative?
Yeah.
What they did is something that SweetBriar did too, which is smart. They picked a particularly low year in terms of enrollment, and then they projected out into the future, basically that would continue or get worse. In a sense, they were saying we have absolutely no faith that we're going to go back to what we normally are, and we think it's going to continue to decline. It's really hard to counter that because, I mean, you don't know what things are going to go. It certainly didn't look to me like that would happen unless something drastic happened. I guess my point was that what they were saying was happening, the trends they were talking about were so big and drastic that they would only happen if you were doing something fundamentally wrong and different than what you've been doing before, or if something radical had changed. The kind of things that I would look for are things that people don't usually talk about, little things. For example, at SweetBriar, when we changed from a fixed date of an application date to rolling admissions, that's a big decision that people don't really seem to think through sometimes. The decision to raise or lower tuition and discount rate is a big decision. For you guys, the decision to not accept the SATs or to take that anymore was a big decision, and it was a risk. Those kinds of things can have the kinds of impact that we're seeing until you correct them. The whole point of these things is that you can fix them when you notice them. I would also add that an inefficient or ineffective admissions team can be a serious problem. It's not a job anyone can do. It's a highly technical and specialized job. You need a great team, and you need a team that's been there for a while. It takes a while to sort of build things up in a school. If you had some problem with that, that's a very likely place to look. Also, I do think that once sort of there gets to be the feeling of things going bad, it sort of becomes self-fulfilling. And I don't know who tanked and when, but I think that something like that happened. I know our admissions director, when the board came in, one of the statements, at least I was told, was said to him by our chair of the board was that every sinking ship needs a pilot, I believe, which was interpreted as we're hiring you, but we know this is going to crash and burn, and that's sort of the point of it. And I think there's a point where that happens too. But I would look to admissions and to big decisions related to what you're doing with that, and marketing too, as the areas where they were. I heard you had some unrest on campus too. I just don't know how much that affected students coming in. Maybe that would matter. My guess is that matters to you a lot more than it matters to perspective. But I don't know. I just don't know.
This is Joan, I'm an alum. One of the things that when you're talking about the taking on purpose, as we have been finding out, a lot was happening before anybody told us that they were thinking about a merger. So they had time to stop collecting revenue or to stop, they had time to turn those graphs before we were even aware that they were talking about that.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I mean, we went down the rabbit hole of sort of conspiracy-minded thinking. I can't tell you how much weird stuff I ended up doing and talking to and surreptitiously trying to get records and stuff. And I don't know how useful it is of a path to go down with that. I think it would be a very human and normal thing once you decide that you're going to close to do that, to tank, frankly. And I think that decent people normal people would do that. And I think that if you have a couple of shady ones on there with any sort of power, then they definitely would do it. So in a sense, I think you should just take it as for granted that some of that's going on. That doesn't mean it doesn't do real damage, but it means that you should take take as a grain of salt the very last numbers, which are probably intentionally bad or based on their decision to close in themselves. Doesn't mean it's not real, but it does counter the narrative that all of this was necessary, which I think is one of the best things you can do is counter it. You don't have too much power right now.
This is Salman Hamid, and I have a question about the cohort that you were comparing with Hampshire with Annapolis group. Mm-hmm. From what I've again heard and seen through some of those things, that the New England area in particular is being impacted by the demographic cliff that people are talking about, or low enrollments. Do you have you looked at data separating it by region? Like, are we in a particular region which is more impacted, even though the overall trends are there?
I haven't looked at that. It wouldn't surprise me if there was a small effect there. I mean, these regional trends at this point, again, are really small and really long term, but they at the margins they matter. I guess my issue though is that you guys are not at the margins. If you looked at sort of schools, liberal arts colleges, you looked at who was really in trouble, who had really few resources and really problems. You guys aren't going to show up there. In any measure of sort of institutional financial health, you're not going to be anywhere near there. So yeah, it's probably an effect. And if you guys want to go look at that, you could probably figure it out looking through the IPEDS database and figuring that out. It'd be non-trivial, but you could probably do something. It's a good question, though.
All right. My last question was just, so you got all the data from iPads, is that right, or other sources?
I use two sources. There's really three main sources of data to use for this. They all give you the same information, but it's reported differently, and so you kind of have to learn how to do that. I have not looked at your tax forms, the 990s. That's one source. They're a pain to deal with, but I've looked at your some of the data I showed you are from your own financial audits, which are freely available on your own website. And the rest is from the IPEDS database. The IPEDS is you report there. It's federal reporting, and they put it in a database. So it's your own numbers. It's highly reliable. And between that and your own reported audits, the story is pretty clear. It doesn't look to me like there's too much fishy going on with the numbers being reported. What's fishy is that there doesn't seem to be a crisis, or at least a long-term crisis. There seems to be a short-term problem that needs to be addressed, but why in the world they think you're going to go to historically low numbers of students for multiple years? I mean, unless they cause that to happen, it's unclear why they would expect that. Yes.
One thing we've been told is that if we admitted an incoming class, that class would have cost us more money than they would bring in, which never made sense to me. Yeah. And and also last year they did a big push where they hired 4 additional staff, opened up a new office for supporting incoming students, and so much of the added cost of those students was due to their own decisions. But I'm just wondering if you have any insight for why a class that would cost more than it brought in.
Well, in general, education is highly subsidized, and it's a hard question because not having that class is a big cost too. But they're going to counter that by getting rid of a lot of stuff. Basically, they're going to counter that by firing people and whatnot, by changing things completely. I think what they were saying is that if they brought in that class, it wasn't going to be enough to deal with the deficit. In other words, the number of students there was not sustainable for your size. If you were going to be the kind of institution that could break even with the kind of incoming classes you have, you're going to have to make some serious cuts, and that would be cuts to programs again. Probably there's probably not enough you can do otherwise. It's really painful, but when the choice is the college, sometimes that has to happen, at least temporarily. So I think that's really what was going on, is that you would lose money if you had the same expenses, but you had that class come in. Now, I mean, if you cut expenses and brought in the class, then obviously that logic doesn't hold. But I guess what they're saying is the status quo was not sustainable. Although you had ways, it was sustainable for a number of years, and you would not have had a problem with this class. You could have figured that out, even if it got a little ugly by the end, certainly. And again, that would only be in a worst case scenario where all these other schools are figuring it out, but you suddenly can't. That's not, again, that's the sign of management issues.
I will ask a naive question that everybody has been asking of me, like wherever I travel. The question is why? Why would somebody do that?
Yeah, we all struggled with this a ton, and I think the answer is there's going to be a lot of different motivations. There's a lot of people involved. I would say that that the board, you have a board of a bunch of people. Again, that can highly be manipulated by a couple, and most of them are probably going to go along with what the strong people say. So the fact that they all went along shouldn't mean that there's some secret conspiracy among all of them. It's probably just that there are a few strong personalities guiding things, and most people don't really understand what's happening. But I think that there are potentially a number of reasons. I think there were some people who were legitimately scared of liability issues, where they saw these numbers, they didn't know the context of them, it looked really scary, and they didn't want to be sued. I think that if you had some people with certain political beliefs running the show there, they do not. I briefly, during all of the SweetBriar thing, went on conservative message boards and talked about schools and liberal arts, and I've never been so insulted directly for what I did and nothing else. There's a group of people who hate college professors and liberal arts colleges, and I know you had an unfortunate incident with the flag burning, which is going to feed right into that kind of mentality. I think it's very likely there were a couple people on the board who did not like what kind of institution you had, and who saw this as an opportunity to change it. I have no doubt in my mind that was at least part of it. But again, I don't know. You can try to figure out the motivation. We spent so long doing it, and never really came up with it, because I think there are a lot of different people that have different motivations. And regardless, once they've made a decision, as a psychologist, we know the cognitive dissonance, they're going to find ways to justify it one way or another that fit who they are. So, but I think probably you had some political and some panic and some incompetence, would be my guess is what's going on.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay. One more question?
About, this isn't so much as a question, but like a response to like the question of why. About 10 years ago at Tufts, there was some serious mismanagement that was actually very similar to what, or had similarities to what is now happening at Hampshire. And I was able to talk to one of the major student organizers from that time period over break. And he introduced me to something called the falling up theory, which is when people will come into vulnerable institutions, whether they're colleges or nonprofits or businesses, and wreak havoc basically. And then they'll move up in the world into other sectors and say, I did what needed to be done. I didn't cut, I saved, and they are able to manipulate like information in this way that we've seen like with the graphs, and that is one theory as to why this has been going on.
I completely agree with that sentiment, and it's one of the reasons why I think having as strong a counter to at least the narrative they put out as possible is really important. But again, you're all, I can't, it's terrible what you're all individually having to go through. It's like you're, in a sense, you're being asked to help higher ed while at the same time your whole world is being sort of thrown topsy-turvy. They know that's what's going on. Frankly, they did a much better job of doing what they're doing here than they did at SweetBriar. I wouldn't be surprised if they learned some of our mistakes. The sort of the slow trickle, instead of announcing all at once that it's closing, giving us all sorts of avenues for lawsuits and being riled up, they gave you some semblance of hope, even though I'd really be shocked if they throw you even a bone at this point. I mean, I hate to be negative about it, but I just don't think it's really out for your best interest at this point. Your guess is they'd rather be done with this and not have to think about you at all, probably. Even working with the board who I really liked at SweetBriar, it was very interesting to be with that kind of person. They're not like faculty, and they particularly get us or like us, even the ones on our side. So anyway, sorry. If I ramble, I apologize.
Yeah,
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dan. This was really appreciated. Very insightful. And all the time putting those figures together.
Yeah. Good luck, everyone. And if you have any questions, just send me a note. And otherwise, I'm rooting for you in every way I can.
Will we have access to the slides too?
I can send those along, certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Bye.
Ethan, was it recorded also?
Yeah, on Skype. Hopefully this works.
Yeah.
So.